Hello, and welcome to the virtual July 4th presentation hosted by the Grover Cleveland Birthplace Memorial Association in Caldwell, New Jersey. My presentation will be what Independence Day meant to Grover Cleveland. Now, my name is Picone. I am a board member on the Grover Cleveland Birthplace Memorial Association, as well as the author of 3 books about the presidents. Where the Presidents Were Born, The History and Preservation of the Presidential Birthplaces. The President is Dead, The Extraordinary Stories of the Presidential Deaths, Final Days, Burials, and Beyond. And the upcoming, in early 2021, Grant's Tomb, The Epic Death of Ulysses S. Grant, and the Making of an American Pantheon. And I am broadcasting today from my Louis L. Picone Presidential Library here in my hometown of Roxbury, New Jersey. So what did Independence Day mean to Grover Cleveland? Well, first let's take a step back and talk a little bit about Independence Day. So on July 2nd, 1776, the members of the Continental Congress voted to declare independence against Great Britain. Now, 2 days later, the Declaration of Independence was formally adopted in Independence Hall, Philadelphia. And that day, the Declaration of Independence was sent out to the printers, which is the reason that you see July 4th, 1776 emblazoned upon the Declaration of Independence, and which is the reason today that we celebrate Independence Day on July 4th. Now, John Adams knew that the day would be a major holiday throughout American history. And he had written out Abigail and said, "Independence Day will be the most important epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfire, and illuminations, or fireworks, from one end of the continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore." But what did Independence Day mean to Grover Cleveland, and how did he spend his Independence Days? Well, as a boy, Grover Cleveland later recalled, much later in life, when a reporter had asked him about his July 4th as a boy growing up in Caldwell, New Jersey, in Fayetteville, New York, and then later on in Buffalo, New York. But he had simply said, "They were all odd and exciting. I cannot very well discriminate." But surely he would have attended parades and fireworks that were typical of the time in the region. Now, we do have one very interesting account of Grover Cleveland as a young boy, along with several of his friends, were very enthusiastic about the 4th of July. Now, just think of this for any of you parents out there that might be concerned with your children holding sparklers on July 4th. Grover Cleveland and his friends decided to have their own cannon made so they can fire the 4th of July fireworks. So they collected iron ore, they brought it to a foundry in Manilus, and had it melted down to make a cannon. But there was a problem. They didn't have enough money to pay the foundry. So according to the story, Grover Cleveland was the most industrious of the bunch, and he came up with the idea to go collect more iron ore to give to the foundry as payment. So while Grover Cleveland later recalled that as a boy he could not very well discriminate one July 4th from the other, once he entered the world of politics there was certainly more to discriminate. In 1882, as mayor of Buffalo, Grover Cleveland, along with 21st President Chester Arthur, attended the laying of the cornerstone at the Soldiers and Sailors Monument in Lafayette Square in downtown Buffalo. 2 years later, 1884, now as governor of New York, Grover Cleveland was back in Lafayette Square in Buffalo, this time to attend the dedication of the completed Soldiers and Sailors Monument. As president, Grover Cleveland wasn't so active in patriotic ceremonies on July 4th. He would typically spend the day working, like he did on his first July 4th in 1885 as president, when he didn't receive any visitors and he spent the day working. There was one notable exception in 1896 when the president was in Pope's Creek, Virginia, to attend the dedication of a 50-foot tall obelisk that had been erected at the exact site where George Washington was born. The only problem was when they found out years later that George Washington's actual birthplace was actually several hundred feet away from where the obelisk had been erected. But that is another story for another time. Perhaps more instructive than how Grover Cleveland spent his July 4th is what July 4th meant to Grover Cleveland and how he felt that the day should be recognized and Americans should celebrate the day. And he did leave us several very informative letters that still resonate today. Now, every year when Grover Cleveland was president, he was invited to a celebration at Tammany Hall in New York. Now, Grover Cleveland was a reformer president during the Gilded Age, at a time when businesses and politicians were rife with corruption. Now, one of the political machines most emblematic of that corruption was Tammany Hall. And even though Grover Cleveland was from New York, he was much opposed to Tammany Hall and much against their politics. So each year Grover Cleveland would be invited to a Tammany Hall celebration, and each year Grover Cleveland would politely decline the invitation. But in doing so, he would send a nice letter, which surely he had figured was going to be published. So in 1885, he received such an invitation, and he decided to reply with a statement about his responsibilities as president, party politics, and how Americans should recognize the day. Now, in listening to this, just recall that his campaign slogan was, "A public office is a public trust." I regret a pressure of official duties and engagements prevent my acceptance of this kind invitation. Of the purposes sought to be accomplished by the people in their choice of a chief magistrate, I am seriously mindful. In order that the hopes of the people will be fully realized, every member of the party in power should yield a cordial support to all efforts on the part of the administration to restore a pure, free, and just government. While the coming celebration will revive and keep alive the memory of patriotic devotion and sacrifice for the sake of free institutions, no occasion is more propitious for a renewal of our pledges to a true and progressive democracy, so essential to our country's safety and prosperity. Yours very truly, Grover Cleveland. In 1887, Grover Cleveland was once again invited to a Tammany Hall celebration and once again declined. This time his letter was much more brief. I hope the significance of Independence Day will preeminently exist in a clear and emphatic announcement of the principles and belief which accord with the best and most thoughtful opinions of our countrymen. Now, that day his letter was read to the politicians at the Tammany Hall celebration, and it was met with boos and hisses. Now, I got a feeling Grover Cleveland, being so opposed to the corrupt politics of Tammany Hall, would have been just fine with that. In 1893, Grover Cleveland once again received an invitation to the Tammany Hall celebrations. Now, this response is a much more direct rebuke of the Gilded Age type of politics and the economic disparities and his commitment to honest government. We should lose the most important lesson of the day we celebrate if we forget that the labor and diligence of those entrusted with self-government must be unremitting and always patriotic. There has never been a time when our countrymen should be more soberly reminded that they could not safely delegate their duties and obligation of citizenship nor neglect to cultivate their individual and personal interest in public affairs. If those who now celebrate the anniversary of American independence guard the sordid struggle for unearned wealth that stifles patriotism, if they exact from public servants the strictest of accountability in the performance of public duties, if they hold fast to the American ideas that work is honorable and economy is virtue, if they insist that there should be honesty and cleanliness in politics, and if they refuse to encourage expedients that endanger foreign or national finances, those who follow us will joyously celebrate the day in centuries yet to come. Yours very truly, Grover Cleveland. Now, in 1904, Grover Cleveland was long out of office, and after making such eloquent pronouncements on July 4th and attending patriotic celebrations, he had well earned the right to sit back and rest. So in 1904, Grover Cleveland was in Buzzards Bay in Cape Cod at his vacation home, and he spent the day fishing. So today, as you celebrate July 4th, perhaps you're fishing like Grover Cleveland, perhaps you're having a barbecue with friends and family and fireworks. Let me leave you with one more thought, something to ponder, from Grover Cleveland from his 1893 letter. This is the day which all true Americans ought to celebrate as often as it occurs. The occasion should revive and stimulate all ennobling and patriotic sentiments which are essential to the safety and perpetuity of American institutions. At such times it is fitting that we rejoice in the dauntless purpose and constant devotion that have thus far marked out the way of our nation. So I would like to wish everyone out there happy July 4th. For more information, please visit www.presidentcleveland.org. Finally, I would like to thank my son and director, Vincent Picone, for doing such a terrific job on this video. And once again, happy July 4th, everybody. Thank you.